So next week marks 100 years, the centenary of the Amritsar Massacre in 1919. Amritsar, of course, is a sacred site in Sikhism, and the event was one of the turning points in the Indian independence movement and one of the darkest acts ever committed by the British Empire. The scene was depicted in great detail in the film Gandhi, and one of the most notorious aspects of it was the general responsible, General Dyer, was given a court martial, but that was seen as, or rather, he was brought before a tribunal, but the response was seen as very lenient. Um, there had actually been some missionaries killed just before the incident, which is no justification for what happened, but there is context there. So, anyway, the BBC was posing the question, should Britain apologise to India for this? My response is no, and this is why. I think, well, let me put that another way. I don't think we should apologize to Indians today because there isn't a single Indian alive today who was around at that time, or at least no one who is a direct descendant of the event. There may well be Indians who are centenarians. Oh, I'm sure there are, but no Indian today can honestly say that they were directly impacted by the Amritsar massacre. So profound. We're talking about an event 100 years ago. Um, I think we should definitely acknowledge it. We should definitely acknowledge that it was an unjustified massacre. That's what it was. We cannot do what the Chinese government does with Tiananmen Square and just pretend it never happened. It did happen. We were guilty, and there's no justification for it. Over 300 innocent people gunned down in cold blood. And it isn't the only crime of the British Empire. There were atrocities committed during the Indian Mutiny, which Indian nationalists call the First War of Independence. That's actually misleading because India was not a unified political entity when the British East India Company took over. So that's just it's a misdemeanor because a war of independence would be when a country is an independent country, it's taken over, it's occupied, then it gets independence again. But India was before the British was not a single political entity. It was a collection of princely states with the remnants of the old Mughal Empire. So that I think is misleading. There is another issue I take, and this will be controversial. I left a few comments on the BBC post, and I'm expecting a lot of angry responses to that, but I think it has to be said, and that is Indian hypocrisy. Post independence India is not exactly a beacon of human rights. It may be the world's biggest democracy, but post independence India cannot claim to be a standard bearer of human rights. I mean, things the Indian Army has done in Kashmir and elsewhere, um, human rights abuses committed during the emergency in the mid 70s, and rampant caste discrimination within Hinduism continues, even though it's denied. And although officially there are laws against it, it absolutely continues, and it's grotesque violation of basic human rights. And today, far right Hindu nationalism is on the rise, or rather, far right Hindu extremism. Nationalism, has to be said, has a different context perhaps in countries like India than it would in Europe, but definitely far right Hindu extremism is on the rise. I mean, Muslims have been lynched over supposedly selling beef, even though India is a major beef exporter. I mean, brutally lynched. And has the Modi government done enough to protect them? Has the Modi government done enough to prosecute these people? No. I would say its response has been apathetic at best. So, when Indian nationalists point the finger at the old Raj and the crimes that the Raj committed, it seems a bit hypocritical because post-independence India, a lot of things have went on where there's been no formal apologies. And obviously people will say, oh, you're British, you would say that, and they'll call me all the names under the sun. So be it. I think What's happening in India today is concerning. It's concerning wherever nationalism is on the rise, but it's happening in India now. We're coming up to major elections. You know, it's the world's largest democratic exercise. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I do hope that moderates start to get into power because I think Modi's victory 5 years ago galvanized the far right, and it's concerning. But you know, when we're talking about that, another thing about an official apology about this, it would then lead to demands for reparations. But Britain already gives India millions in aid, millions and millions, if not billions, cumulatively. So I don't think we should be giving reparations for things that happened in the now a century ago. We should acknowledge it. We should acknowledge it, but reparations, no, because no one alive today in India can honestly say they were directly impacted by that. If we were talking about survivors of the massacre, and this is an argument we probably should have done it in the past, but that's just history. We haven't done it, and you know, people alive today were not direct victims of that. So no, I don't think we should give reparations. Not when we're already giving millions in aid, and there are legitimate questions as to where that aid is going. I mean, India has a very expensive space program. India has put up massive statues of nationalist leaders. So I think it's a bit galling to always. I think what happens here is that the Indian ultra right use the Raj as a sort of excuse to distract from their own problems, and this is an old trick, not just against Britain. Other countries use it against their former colonial powers. It's just a convenient scapegoat. You know, let's dig up the crimes of the British Empire to distract from problems today. So I just find the hypocrisy a bit galling. I mean, India hasn't apologized for its treatment of the Chennai Six, six innocent men who were arrested off the coast of India a few years ago. They were finally allowed to return home, but has India apologized for the rough way they were treated? No. Um, you know, India is a major trading partner. We obviously have ties because of British Indians and the diaspora here. And I do believe that we need to be honest about the wrongs of our imperial past. I'm not one of these people that say it was all good, you know. But I do think that, I mean, India cannot call itself a very tolerant country, you know, in terms of human rights abuses. And actually, in terms of racism, India, again, cannot claim to be a standard bearer in this. So I find that constantly pointing fingers at the old empire, it's just convenient, you know, and there's times when this descends into almost hysteria. Like, I mean, for goodness sake, Hindu extremists were talking about burning down British cinemas recently because they were going to show a controversial film. That's the sort of mentality we're talking about. I think they're just as extreme as Islamist fanatics or any other fanatics. Thankfully, they're largely restricted to India, but um, you know, that's happening today. So yes, let's acknowledge an atrocity that occurred 100 years ago, but I think that it's just very hypocritical to talk about that and to demand apologies from Britain whilst turning a blind eye to things that have gone on in post-independence India. And I know this will be controversial. I know people will say all sorts of things about me. So be it. I'm not going to be bullied by anyone. If you don't like this, fine. Make a rival video, thumb me down, leave a whatever. You know, that's the internet. But I'm getting a little bit tired of nationalistic Indians constantly using this as a scapegoat. The past is the past. It was wrong. But you know, if we go far enough back, if we really take this logic, and it comes back to this video I made about President Obrador demanding apologies from Spain. If we go far enough back, I mean, well, where do you draw the line? Everyone would be demanding apologies from everyone. The region of England I live in, people could demand apologies from Norway because of Viking pillage. The Vikings killed and they exploited. Maybe not on the same scale, but it happened. And to me, history is history. History should be acknowledged. We should learn lessons from history. But the problem with formal apologies is they denote guilt to the present day government. And Theresa May's government is not responsible for what happened at Amritsar. Anyway, David Cameron's already been there. He did stop short of a full apology, but he absolutely acknowledged what happened. And I just think it would be hypocritical to demand apologies from Britain when India isn't being honest about its own record, post independence India.